I'm Adrian Clark, and I am the darker brother. They send me to the kitchen to eat when company comes. That's Langston Hughes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. One of our church members asked if I talk about my story. And here lately, it's kind of hard to tell that story, but I agreed to do it. So here it goes. Once again, I'm Adrian Clark. I am the father of 2 sons. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I have 3 brothers and I have 3 sisters. I was raised by my dad. I was raised by my mom, which is kind of weird because they were separated. And ultimately, I was raised by an aunt. Her name is Rosa Steele. And I emphasize the aunt because she sacrificed everything to keep our family together and to raise our family. You know, I could easily say, oh, this was my grandmother, but I'll let you know about that. My father, his mother died when he was very young. So my Aunt Rosa, she took in my father, his brother, and another aunt of mine, and raised them as her own. Well, fast forward a little bit, in 1980, I was born. And I lived with an older brother, an older sister, another brother, and then me being the youngest when the first 4 came. And we had a very modern family at the time. We lived in a house in Rockingham, North Carolina. That house had 3 bedrooms, but it slept, starting with those 4, my father, my uncle, and my aunt. And then the aunt that I live with. So that's 8 people in a 3-bedroom house already. We grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. Not predominantly, all black neighborhood. And at the time, we didn't know we were poor, but we lived check to check. I knew that things wouldn't get better starting, after payday to the next payday. But my aunt showed me love. Now back to this modern family thing where, I was raised by my mom, raised by my father, and raised by my aunt. Once again, I said we lived with my aunt. It was her house. But, my father, he applied the money aspect of it. Even though my aunt, she worked, older black lady, her job, she was a domestic. She worked in the families. She worked in the household of white families. She'd do whatever needed to be done. She'd keep kids. She'd clean the house. Heck, sometimes she'd even babysit the dogs at our house. And then once she got off of work, she had to come home and do it all over again, but she did it for free. And, that was how we grew up. Now, my mother, who moved away for a little bit, went to New York, and then moved back down to Rockingham, lived across town in the housing projects. And we were able to go from one house to the other. And once my mom moved back from New York, she had my younger brother and 2 younger sisters. So, family of 7, like I said earlier. But here's kind of where my story begins. My father, like I said, he brought the money in. And me watching him work, he wasn't lazy like some people think that are, black people in black neighborhoods, they assume that they're lazy. My father worked from 8 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock in the morning. He worked that 3rd shift. So I knew he worked hard to provide for us, but he didn't have a father, and maybe he didn't know how to do all the things that a father should do. But I believe he did his best. And whenever it came to financial things, he provided on that front, which was really appreciated. And whereas my mother, who lived across town, anytime medical issues would come up with any of the 7 kids, she was more on the forefront of that. But where my aunt Rosa comes in at, she taught me how to love no matter what. She taught me by sacrifice, because once again, if she told everybody to get out of her house, we're homeless, But she never once said that. Out of my 19 years of living with her, I've never once heard her say, God dang it, I wish you guys would just get out of the house. All right. Every Sunday morning, she'd go to Mount Pisgah AME Zion Church. AME, of course, is African Methodist Zion Church, Episcopal Zion Church. So every Sunday, she'd tap me up, hey boy, let's go to church. Let's go to church. And when I was younger, of course, you didn't have an option. But then once you get up a little older, she wasn't going to pull teeth, but she was going to wake you up to make sure you go. So I just love seeing my aunt and how she showed love at church to everyone. Of course, she stayed busy in church. She was an usher. She used to bring the communion glasses home, wash them out. And notice she used to do all of these things, and she would give of herself after going to work. And she used to walk to work. I'd never seen her drive. But I digress. Getting back to my story, and I know she is part of my story. She is my story. All right. So, I was raised in the church, Buds of Promise. I used to go to all the youth retreats and all the youth gatherings, but where I lived at had a hold of me also. Like I said, I grew up in the 80s. In the 80s, I grew up not knowing we were poor until the crack epidemic hit, Reaganomics, things like that. I lived on a side road of the main road where everything was jumping off. We call it the block. And these are the places where our barbershops were, our convenience stores, Black-owned businesses. Now that I look at it and think back about it. And one thing about Rockingham that I can truly say, and now that I'm older and I live where I live, there were Black-owned businesses. There were people who looked like me who represented what I could be. And get from kindergarten, I remember there was a Black teacher by the name of Miss Young. First grade, there was Miss Clark and Miss Lockhart. My primary school years, our principal was a Black man. His name was Mr. Clark. Once I got to high school, middle school, we had Daryl Mason, he was a guy I looked up to because he was a teacher, he was a coach, and he was easy to relate to because he looked like me. He actually went to church with me. And I'm saying all of that to say this. Coming up, I saw people who looked exactly like me in positions that I could aspire to, and everybody doesn't have that, and it's hard. A lot of people say, why are Black people, not happy with what they have? They should be happy. They have this, they have that. They have Barack Obama, they have Michael Jordan. Those guys are the exception. But we're talking about everyday life. And when Hal Derrick asked me to do this, and he said, tell your story, my first thought was, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a really important person. What I do for a living, I teach physical education and I coach high school football. Do I think those things are important? Yeah, but next year's coming and it's going to be replaced by the next year that's coming and it's going to be replaced. But I say all those things just to let you guys know that the more you see yourself out there represented, it tells you what you could be. It's one thing to say, hey, you can be an astronaut, you can be the president, but if I've never seen a Black astronaut, if I've never seen a Black president, I don't believe you. If I've never seen a Black pastor in a mixed congregation church, I don't believe you. But to actually see that, it's believable for a young man such as myself and for my kids. So moving on, like I said, I was born in Rockingham, where actually right now the sheriff of that town is a Black man. And you're like, well, that sounds like a real nice place, Adrian. And it is a nice place, but it still has its holdups. Out of all this time, I grew up in the 80s. My aunt, who grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and it's not always been like that for her. And like I said, hey, I grew up in the 80s. It's not been that great for me always. and I may be rambling, but just to say, my first incident with racism, I was in the 6th grade, and I delivered newspapers in that town. And, the old school way, I had a big duffel bag of newspapers, and I would go door to door dropping those newspapers off. Well, there's one time I was in this apartment complex, and a little white kid walks up to me and said, "What are you doing around here, N-word?" And that was the first time I was called that. Now, I didn't just get upset and start yelling and screaming at him. Now, I did beat him up. I beat the little kid up, and now that I look at it, not the perfect thing to do, but I was in the 6th grade at the time. But when it happened, I didn't feel wrong for doing it because I wasn't bothering him. I was doing my job. I was paid to drop these newspapers off to these places, and I had a kid out of nowhere, and I'm pretty sure he had to be taught that. And for him to just walk up to me and say that kind of pissed me off. I beat him up, and I carried on with my route. And when I got home, and I told my aunt, she was like, "Adrian, you got to love people, Adrian." And I was like, but it wasn't fair that he did that. And one thing she said to me then, she said, it wasn't fair how they crucified Jesus Christ, and he was perfect. And that stuck with me. I was in the 6th grade, and here I am 40 now, and I can tell that story. And at the time, I didn't understand him. I was like, okay, Ro, I won't fight him no more. I'll just, keep going. So I avoided him. And for me, life has been good so far. People saw potential in me. They saw that, if Adrian studies a little harder, he'll be decent in school, he can go to college. If he, focuses a little bit more, he can play football and things like that, which is all great and good. But one thing that this one guy, his name is Bruce Stanback, who saw in me and what he taught me was, he taught me Black history. Black history was taught in school, but back in the 80s and early 90s, our Black community thought it would be important to share more Black history. They taught us about W.E. Du Bois. They taught us about Martin Luther King, of course, Malcolm X, of course, Sojourner Truth, Alex Haley. And actually, I remember receiving a copy of Alex Haley Root's book, and those things, once again, it showed me, be proud that you're Black. Be proud of who you are. And not only be proud, share it. Don't put your hands in your pocket. Let people know who you are. Let people know who you come from, what you come from. So I try to do that. And I try to do that in my everyday life. I try to do it at church. I try to do it in my job at school. And I tried to do it when I was in school. All right. Fast forwarding a little bit, I was lucky enough and blessed enough to play college football at Gardner Webb University. And I could sit here and tell you guys about all the stories because none of you guys can fact check me. So I'll tell you how great I was. But a story that I do want to tell you about Gardner Webb is predominantly white school. And, here I am. I feel like a fish out of water again. I'm around, people who don't look like me. Now, there wasn't a lot of professors that looked like me. But my classmates, a lot of the classmates who did look like me, they all were athletes. So, we kind of had a bond. We kind of had an understanding. I remember being in the class one time, a history class, after taking an exam, and the teacher had left and saying, "Hey, man, look, the only Black people in this class are athletes." So, and that's a blessing on one hand, but on the other hand, are we saying if you're not an athlete, you don't deserve an education, you can't come in and get an education? I don't think that's right, but, there's a certain set of rules that we're trying to play by. And everybody, we don't have the study guide to pass that test always. All right? But I got through college by way of, with the help of my beautiful wife, Miriam. And Miriam's everything to me. She's my rock. she opens my eyes, she keeps me grounded, and she kind of opens my mind a little bit. Now, Miriam isn't an African-American female. Miriam's Mexican. And I remember in 10th grade looking at my Spanish teacher sitting in one of those chairs and looking at her and thinking about, hey, why am I in this class? I'm never going to need Spanish. Here it is. I've married a Mexican woman, and I've lived in a Mexican country before. I'm not a Mexican. I'm sorry. I lived in a Spanish country before. I lived in Puerto Rico, and I was wrong. You know, my mind was closed when I was in the 10th grade. And from that lesson, I've learned keep your mind open, Adrian, and it doesn't hurt to learn new things. You never know when you're going to need them. All right. So, like I said, I graduated and we got married very early. We got married at 21. And that was in 2020. That was 19. What year was that? 2002. Sorry, baby. 2002, we got married. And, you know, we've grown together. We've gone through a lot of things together. And this one time at Gardner Webb, I was with some friends, and we had went out partying, you know, at a dance club. A lot of the guys that I was with, they were drinking, and I chose not to drink for whatever reason. I went to just dance, and on our way back, we were pulled over by a police officer. Now, and I was doing the driving. I didn't drive to the club, but coming back, I decided to drive because everybody was drinking, and come to find out, my license was suspended. And we got pulled over. And the guy who pulled us over, we got pulled over by a state trooper and a local police officer. And when we got pulled over, the state trooper asked, you know, can I see your license and registration? I said, sir, my license suspended. Shouldn't be driving. I said, you're right. I said, but everybody in the car, they've been drinking. And he said, all right, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna write you a ticket, but you can't move this car. And I was scared to death, but I saw a break in there, and I was like, okay, I shouldn't have been driving, but I have another chance right now. You know, I was scared to death. Well, then the local cop heard that, and he was like, well, you know what? I'm taking him to jail because he shouldn't be driving. Now, I don't know how you see that. You may not see it as race, but how am I supposed to see it when one person who's the authority says, hey man, you did a good job, even though you're not supposed to be driving, get out of the car, lock it down, call somebody to come get you. I don't care what you do, don't move the car. Thank you, sir, please. And then the local cop's like, nope, I'm taking him in. Like he had no remorse, he had no understanding, he had no empathy. And I think that comes back to the reason why I want to tell my story. How I want people to empathize. I want people to understand that I'm just like you. I make mistakes. They don't mean I'm a bad guy. There are some mistakes you can make that will make you a bad guy. But I think driving those people home, and needless to say, the other people, they weren't black. Like nothing was said about them being underage and drinking. Nothing was said. It was only said that he broke the law. I'm taking him to jail. And even one of the guys who was with me kind of got disrespectful with the cop. He was like, hey, you can't do that. Like he's with us. You can't do that. And the guy was like, yes, I can. And he put me in the jail. He put me in the car. I went to jail that day. Didn't stay long, thankfully. I was scared to death because I know that as a black man, you don't necessarily get a lot of chances. You don't get a chance to be a kid. You don't get to be a kid and make certain mistakes. And I didn't get that chance that night. I had to go to jail. Now, luckily, Bruce Standback, who was a mentor of mine when I was younger, he was able to pull some strings and talk to lawyers and things like that. And, you know, I had to pay my debt to society. And I think I did it, and it's not a big deal anymore. But in my mind, when I get pulled over in that county, in that city, I'm thinking that guy is coming to flex his muscle on me just because, But I've since moved, and I live in the mountains of Hendersonville, North Carolina. And Hendersonville, North Carolina, it's not as diverse as some of the other places I've lived. But I always think that I could be the change. I could, I feel like sometimes I can represent all black people. And sadly, I can't. I'm not a representation of all black people. All right? But a lot of them I am, believe it or not. Like I said, I teach, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to teach in the community I live in. If I go down the road 45 minutes to Shelby, North Carolina, I can easily get a teaching job there. I've actually taught in that county twice. I can go to Buncombe County. I've worked in Buncombe County at 2 different high schools. I've worked at Asheville High School and Asheville City Schools twice. But Henderson County, for some odd reason, I can't get a job. And it's hard for me to understand. I'm not saying the person that they hired before me isn't a better teacher than I am, but I'll leave it up to you this is the only thing I'll throw out. He's a first-year teacher. I'm a 12-year veteran. And it's hard to think that race doesn't play a part there. But I'm not going to sit down and cry, woe is me. I'm going to pick myself up, and I'm going to use that as motivation to do well in whatever I do. And that's what I'm doing now. Something else I want to tell you guys before I leave. I have two sons. Like I said, my wife is Mexican, so they're on both sides of the spectrum. They're black and they're brown. And my oldest son, we're going to get his driver's license or his permit in a couple of days. And I have to give him that talk of make sure you know where the gas tank is. Make sure you know where the spare tire is. And I think for some people, that's where the talk ends. But I have to keep going. I have to tell my son, make sure if you get pulled over, they can see your hands. Make sure you say, yes, sir. Make sure you say, no, sir. And I think that's some things that some people take for granted. But it's something that I can't afford to take for granted. Because if someone accidentally thinks that my son was doing something he wasn't supposed to do, and he doesn't make it home that night, I'm without a son. And I don't know. Let that sit in your heart for a second. Over a mistake, your son's not coming home. And I'm gonna tell you right now, he's 16. He's gonna make a mistake. And I'm 40 years old, and I'm putting that fear in my son. And the only reason why I'm putting that fear in my son is because I have that fear. Like I told you before, I don't live 5 minutes away from my place of work. I have to drive 30, 45 minutes. And anytime those blue lights come on behind me, and I like to believe I'm a law-abiding citizen. Anytime those blue lights come on behind me, my heart skips a beat. I look to make sure my registration is straight. I make sure, I'm not speeding. I for a split second, I panic. I pull over, and my heart just start dancing in my chest. Yes, sir. How you doing, sir? You having a good night? Hope so. Like I'm doing the song and dance to let him know, hey, I'm not a threat. And for those of you who are watching this, listen to me. I'm not a threat. I don't want anything from you. I don't want anything out of your house. I don't want anything out of your bank account. I want to be treated as a human. I want you to know that I teach your daughters. I teach your sons, be it black or white. And my representation to them is, hey, Coach Clark's a cool guy. He smiles. He says hello all the time. don't feel like just because I'm black, just because my hair comes out of my head a little different than yours, that I'm aggressive. Because I'm not. That's not what I'm here for. I want the same things that you guys want. I want the house. I want the kids. I want the job. I want to show you that I'm not lazy. But people in general aren't lazy. If you show me a way to better myself, I'll take that opportunity. Now, you can't just say, oh, go to school, it's an opportunity. Because you know and I know that the system isn't necessarily that simple. All right? And there was days where I didn't want to go to school. There were days where I didn't see the payoff. But there were people, not just black people. There were people who believed in me. They saw my talents. They saw my potential. And they pushed me along. And it's like, hey, keep going. Keep going. And it'll pay off in the long run. So I wanted to do this talk just so you can see me. Just so you can know me. To know that I'm just like you. And believe it or not, you can look at me and say, okay, well, he is just like us. There's somebody else who looks a little bit like me. They have a similar build. They may like another football team. Their hair may be a little different. But you need to give them a chance. Get to know them. Not just assume that, oh, he's black. Assume, oh, he's lazy. Oh, he's got a knife. Oh, he's got a gun. You know, get to know me as a person. Get to know your neighbor as a person. Invite them into your house for a dinner. Really get to know a person. If you really want to get to know a person, invite them into your house, have a sit down for a supper. And that way, they'll know that, you know what? He's trying to understand who I am. He's trying to, because you can learn so much from a person that once you sit down and you break those walls by having that meal, you'll learn so much about a person and give that person a chance. So I just want to say thank you guys for allowing me your time, and be blessed. Thank you.